In our submission, we laid the foundation for some of the recommendations that the Policy Monitoring and Research Center will make in relation to the proposed Public Debt Management Bill of 2022. And we understand that this is against the background of perceived weaknesses in the Loans and Guarantees Authorization Act, Cap 366 of the Laws of Zambia. And so, we understand that the Constitution requires that debt be approved by the National Assembly before contraction, and that previously, as far as we know, loans that have been contracted for on behalf of the Republic have mainly been made by Cabinet, comprising the President and one Minister. The magnitude of the debt incurred without vetting by the National Assembly perhaps is what brings us to the bill that has been laid before the National Assembly. We also know that there have been outcries about the debt's impact on livelihoods, because the amounts that are going to servicing some of the loans that were contracted have had a negative impact on livelihoods, and particularly the delivery of social services such as medicines in hospitals, clean water, sanitation, among others. So we believe that the aim of the reforms in the proposed legislation is to achieve the following: streamlining the function of reporting on public debt and to ensure that there is full disclosure, and also to tighten the oversight role of the National Assembly or Parliament, as the case may be, in contracting debt. This will then foster transparency and accountability in procurement and also reporting on the said public debt. There is an effort to restructure debt management and how it is conducted by creating a National Debt Management Office, which should ideally be an autonomous and independent office, and it will be responsible for developing and executing debt management policies, which will then minimize financing costs over the long term and also help us as a country to manage our aggregate cash needs. Further, it will strengthen public investment management. Hopefully, it will strengthen public investment management as well as project selection and financing to ensure that any debt that will be contracted for project development actually gives a good return on the investment and ensures debt sustainability. So in terms of the current legal framework, the PMRC understands that the current legal framework relating to public finance comprises the Constitution, the Loans and Guarantees Authorization Act, which is the subject of the Review and Replacement Action, as well as the Public Finance Management Act. So in relation to the Constitution, it provides for functions of the legislature, and the Constitution provides the following: that the legislature oversees performance of executive functions on a wide range of matters, including debt contraction. Now, how does it do this? By way of approving public debt before it is contracted. And Article 63(2)(d) is instructive in this regard. This is further consolidated in Article 114(1)(e), which states that Cabinet should recommend for approval to the National Assembly loans and guarantees on loans. It is therefore it is mandatory for Cabinet to seek the approval of the National Assembly before contraction of any loans. That is our understanding. The legislature will also be required through the Constitution to provide for core principles of transparency and accountability for public finance management, as well as auditing and reporting structures. The Loans and Guarantees Authorization Act, Cap 366, aforesaid, which, as I've already mentioned, is the subject of repeal and replace action, provides for the raising of loans, establishment of sinking funds, giving loans, giving of guarantees and indemnities, and granting of loans for and on behalf of the Republic. Under this law, the minister responsible for finance has broad powers to commit government to debt without necessarily seeking approval from the National Assembly. There are some similarities in the provisions of the bill as well as the Act, particularly designating the minister as a substantive officer for debt contraction. It also gives the minister power to give guarantees on behalf of government, which is also provided in the Constitution, to establish sinking funds and to contract loans. Some shortcomings have been noted, which could explain the new direction in the proposed bill, and some of these are: firstly, in its application, this Act excludes loans from international bodies with which Zambia has loan agreements. It has concentrated the power to raise loans for the country in the minister, whereas the Constitution, through Article 65(2)(e), provides for money bills relating to raising or guaranteeing on loans to be laid before the National Assembly. It also makes it mandatory to inform the National Assembly about loans therefore contracted, only if they've exceeded 1 year. It makes provision for creation of sinking funds. Again, that's a similarity. But again, the ministerial discretion extends to obtaining loans even when the National Assembly is not sitting. So we are conversant with the bill, and we think that these shortcomings have actually been remedied in the proposed bill. In relation to the Public Finance Management Act No. 1 of 2018, this act is consequential to the Constitutional Amendment Act of 2016, which repealed and replaced the Public Finance Act. And it came into effect as a result of stakeholder and government recognition that there was need to strengthen the legal framework relating to the management of public funds. So insofar as money is borrowed, spent out of the public purse, is in this act that designates public spending. It governs fiduciary duties of controlling officers, particularly accountability, oversight, management and control, whether it's a ministry, the province or other spending agencies, boards of state-owned enterprises, as well as statutory corporations. Now, we are reminded here that when we talk about public financial management, we're looking at laws, we're looking at rules, systems, and processes. The Public Debt Management Bill. Now, a perusal of the proposed bill highlights the following notable provisions aimed at meeting the aims that we outlined above. Under Section 5, it will seek to establish a debt management office, and that has spelled out the functions of that office, one of which will be to advise government on medium-term debt strategy and annual borrowing plans. And these will be presented to the National Assembly for approval at a time to be stipulated in the Act. We applaud this provision as it firmly places the National Assembly in a position to approve or veto debt prior to contraction. The proposed bill also contains provisions for reporting to the National Assembly over the performance of debt, and we believe this is contained in Part 9. Sections 40, 41, and 42 are comprehensive in this regard. In terms of the provisions relating to publication of annual borrowing plans and medium-term debt strategy, we note these provisions as well. In relation to public debt management generally, the proposed bill makes extensive reference to the Public Finance Management Act, and it's recognized that this is an effort to ensure that there is harmony in the legislation. So some definitions have not been repeated in the bill for this reason, and we understand that this is actually a technical standard of drafting. We, however, do note gaps in relation to, first of all, the role of cabinet in obtaining loans. This has not been comprehensively canvassed in the bill. This has been a particularly contentious issue, and this particular bill is an opportunity to remedy the shortcomings in the loan contraction process. While we appreciate that the Constitution provides for the functions of the executive in relation to loans and guarantees on behalf of the Republic, there is need for more detail, especially if, as government heeds calls for increased transparency and accountability to the extent that this is possible. So the manner of publication is another issue. The manner of publication of information relating to public debt has not been expressly stipulated. What is apparent is that there is no specific manner provided for, and this is left to the discretion of the minister. Here we are referring to Section 42 in particular. The words "in a manner that the minister considers necessary" will import a wide latitude of discretion on the part of the minister, and PMRC is of the view that if the law is to be responsive to calls for accountability, transparency and certainty, that the discretion element needs to be removed, and the manner of publication should be entrenched in a general provision for all the reports under Part 9. Section 41(2) makes reference to publication of a debt statistical bulletin on the official website of the ministry responsible for finance. This should be a general provision for all the reports under that part, whether it's the debt sustainability analysis, the debt statistical bulletin, the execution report, among others. To this, we can add the status of the sinking fund, deposits and withdrawals at any given time. Lessons from other countries. We are drawing lessons from Kenya, Botswana, and Rwanda, and these, we believe, compare very well with the objectives of the proposed bill. The Kenya Public Finance Management Act of 2012 establishes a unified debt management office called the Public Debt Management Office, which is based on good international practice, providing in front, middle, and back office. That country's national treasury also publishes, on an annual basis, a medium-term debt management strategy through which it appraises government's performance in debt, it reassesses debt sustainability conditions, and continues to guide debt policy over the medium term. This can be read in a PMRC analysis of the Public Finance Management Act published a few years ago. In the same vein, Botswana legislation provides specific regulations that set limits for government debt and guarantees cannot exceed 40% of GDP. Rwanda also has the public finance reforms that have been anchored on an integrated financial management information system, FMIS, to provide the necessary communication facilities and financial management information. So as part of this process, we should also be looking at how our own FMIS is positioned in terms of the new thrusts proposed by the bill, especially for the Debt Management Office. Now, key areas of concern relating to the bill. PMRC wishes to summarize the following concerns for consideration by this committee, as it has a bearing on successful establishment of the proposed Debt Management Office. Autonomy of the Debt Management Office. Placing this office under the Ministry of Finance casts a cloud over its autonomy to make decisions relating to approvals of debt contraction. The necessary parameters will have to be stipulated in terms of where it should be positioned and how it shall function. The authority given to the minister and to the president, that is cabinet, to contract loans under certain conditions without approval of the National Assembly will perpetuate the major weakness observed in the Loans and Guarantees Authorization Act. There should ideally be no urgency in getting the country into debt. So those conditions, these certain conditions that have been referred to, will need to be further explained and understood. The discretionary power of the minister to publish loan information undermines calls for public access to information. Section 40, subsection 2, will merely breed speculation. In terms of the offence of financial misconduct on the part of a public officer that is set out in section 46(3), we believe that the definition of financial misconduct does not extend to contracting debts envisaged in this bill. Rather, it refers to what happens to the money after it has come into the financial system. So there is need to clarify the intention here. In terms of recommendations, the Policy Monitoring and Research Center wishes to make the following recommendations. In addition to the staff of the proposed Debt Management Office, it is recommended that a board be included to oversee the decision-making function. Secondly, the role of cabinet in debt contraction should be clearly set out in the bill, and this should include matters pertaining to the composition of cabinet in relation to debt contraction. Ideally should comprise the president, the minister responsible for finance and national planning, and any other 3 members of the executive. Thirdly, the bill should also stipulate the role, updates to the nation on matters relating to debt management should include the status of the sinking fund that will be established by law on both its deposits, withdrawals, and also the balance sheet. The provisions for publication and public access to information should be elaborated upon and strengthened. In particular, here we are referring to section 41(2), which should be the general provision relating to publications and the manner. Part 3 of the bill provides for parliamentary approval of annual borrowing plans and sets limits for annual borrowing. PMRC submits that annual borrowing must be set within a ceiling of the GDP, the debt to GDP ratio. Best practice provides that debt to GDP ratio should at most be 40%. And this is in order to limit borrowing when the country's economy stagnates, as has been witnessed in the period 2012 to 2022, where borrowing was not aligned to economic growth. In 2019, for instance, the country's economy had started declining, but borrowing continued to rise against the ability of the country to sustain its repayments. That is a huge concern. According to the African Development Bank, by 2022, Zambia's debt to GDP ratio was at 102%, and this demonstrated an unsustainable trajectory in borrowing. We therefore submit that in relation to the proposed bill, most of the provisions are sound, except for the concerns that PMRC has raised. We submit, Chairperson. Thank you.
Well, Public Finance Management Act number 1, 2018. I am particularly interested in the last paragraph on there on your submission, where you have stated that the rules of the proposed bill highlights the following notable provisions, saying that meeting the aims outlined above. And then I think fast forward, go to the last sentence on that page 3, where you state that this provision is applauded as it firmly places the National Assembly, turn over to page 4, in a position to approve or veto debt prior to contraction. According to you, this is the inference that you get from the provision that you have cited in the bill. But some other school of thought is not in tandem with what you're submitting here. Some other school of thought that has submitted before this committee believes Parliament is not expressly indicated as having its role in debt contraction. So if I were to ask a very categorical question, like what is Parliament's role in debt contraction? Does the bill address that question? If you can pinpoint to a clause that clearly defines the role of Parliament in debt contraction and debt management, apart from this approval where the minister brings what has already been done and Parliament just checks and either agrees or disagrees. So what is Parliament's role in the process? I hope you understand my question.
Yes.
As a big chairperson.
Thank you. Honorable Smunji.
Based on the sinking fund and the Loans and Guarantees Act, Chapter 366, where it says it's from short term they have been noted in the legislation. And among the short term is we are saying it makes provision for the creation of sinking fund for the loans at the discretion of the Minister of Finance. I thought this provision is sitting now that the sinking fund will be open where principal and interest are being deposited. How do you allow this part?
Okay, you can respond. Follow up. Okay.
Just to follow up, I think as you answered to my question, I've seen also on page 4, I think the second paragraph where you are lamenting, you say, we however note gaps in relation to the following. The first bullet point, you're saying the role of cabinet in obtaining loans has not been expressly provided for. So you're acknowledging that fact. Just like another school of thought, thinks that even for Parliament it's not expressly provided for. So how would you suggest that it should sit in relation to cabinet also, just like the other school of thought feels Parliament's role is not expressly mentioned?
Okay, PMRC.
When we talked about key areas of concern, we do refer to the autonomy of the public debt, the debt management office. We do recognize that the role has not been expressly provided for, but it is also our hope that under the discussion under autonomy, if we place the debt management office in the National Assembly as opposed to in the Ministry of Finance, it will cure some of those challenges, even if they are not expressly set out in the Act. It is going to be more a procedural issue, perhaps not necessarily answered through a provision in the legislation. We deliberately left that open so that as the debate is raging, we don't have a particular position, but we're hoping that we've cured that by highlighting that the debt management office will need to be autonomous. Then Parliament will have a bigger say instead of merely being called upon to rubber stamp decisions when they've already been made. If that office is not placed under the Ministry of Finance and National Planning, but instead sits under the legislator, then that oversight role that is already provided for in the Constitution automatically addresses some of these challenges. At least that's the perspective we chose to take. The schools of thought are many. We've looked at most of them, and this was considered as and. In relation to the sinking fund?
So in relation to the sinking fund, there's an issue of discretion which does not really sit well with us. Discretion is about we can or cannot. So it's an issue of saying, can it just be stipulated clearly to say a sinking fund should be established? So I think in our submission we've indicated there's so much power that is being given to the minister. So also that's where regulation should come. It's more like an issue of saying I can do or I cannot do it. So I think it also depends on yes, I think going back to when people were getting the Euro bonds, a sinking fund was made. And that was made because there's a provision in the law to say sinking funds might be made, but there was no cohesion to say money should be deposited. So in our recommendations, we've put to say every year there should also be, as the minister is giving updates on debt sustainability, debt reports to the National Assembly, one key thing also is to give updates on the sinking fund. I think the sinking fund, the Euro bonds that were gotten in the past, we only had once when they started putting money into the sinking fund. I think that was after 2016. So we'd like those updates. Then we should that would be able us to show that we are ready. Look at what happened to the first bulletin we're supposed to pay in November, because we had no money in the sinking fund. This is where the issue of discretion comes in. But if they are coerced, the minister is coerced to say every year as you give us the debt position, we also want to hear about the money in the sinking fund, so that come the bulletin of 2022, we have money in the sinking fund. Right now, we don't know how much is in there, or are we prepared for the first bulletin of 2022?
Okay, you indicated a Parliament office to sit under the Ministry of Finance, and if I got you were saying maybe to sit under the legislation, and in the same way also under your recommendations, you have indicated that there should be a board where this public debt offices is reporting to. Now, going by what you just said, that we move the office from the ministry to the legislation. And if that happened, would you still also want to see the board created?
Chairperson, the board will follow the location of the office wherever it sits. So our proposal for it to sit under the legislature is so that this approval is debated by a larger number, the representatives of the people. If it is sitting in the executive, the chances of bypassing this approval or the chances of not discussing the requirements of incurring this debt, first of all, will be, it will run contrary to what the act is actually, the bill is actually trying to do. So if you remove it from the executive, where the Constitution has already said the legislature provides oversight to executive functions. So it follows therefore that this debt management office, which still seeks approval from the National Assembly, should ideally sit in the legislature for practical purposes. The board will also follow.
Okay, the issue of time, certain percentage, like in this case, the minister, according to the proposed bill, cannot borrow more than 65% of GDP. And there have been examples in there, like Botswana currently is at 40%. And also there have been also some comments from other players where they're saying, in fact, giving a limit to black and white is also a danger. In an event that maybe the economy is performing very badly and you hit the 65, for example, in this case, and you have nowhere to go. Whatever happens, you are tied. You can't exceed. Currently, you've indicated we are at about 102%. And the reason was maybe because of the strategies. Economic performance goes up, it goes down. So putting 65% in debt. What will be your comment?
Thank you very much. So why it is important to put a ceiling of debt to GDP is to cure the issue of borrowing when the economy is not growing. As a country, because we have this appetite to borrow, even if the economy is not growing. So it's an issue whereby even in a house, you continue borrowing, you go to the bank, you go to PayPal, when remember your income, your salaries are not growing, but because there's this appetite to borrow, maybe you need to buy a TV, you need to buy what, so you continue borrowing, but you have no backbone on how these repayments should be made. That's what we experienced in the past years. To say our economy was growing at this rate, it moved from about 8 to 5 to 3 point something, but we continue to borrow with a notion of saying we are building roads, we are building hospitals, but I feel even in a house, you would rather borrow for business than borrow for consumption. So we need to ensure that our borrowing is in relation to how our economy is growing in order for us to be able to repay what we're able to borrow. Then we now trying to go back, because trying to go back to say no, you borrow and then you reach an end. You don't have to start going back to IMF and what. When really, I think this thing had hit debate at some point when our borrowing ratio was moved to around 52%. I remember very well. It brought issues, especially in Parliament, to say, and we had an issue of saying, no, we've moved it to 55, we've moved it to 65, because we still have a big threshold for borrowing. So that's what we're trying to cure. We're trying to cure this appetite to borrow when we have no ability to pay back.